Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Out of Exile. Now, I actually heard about this movie with my conversation with the star of the film in this movie, Adam Hampton, who I've had on my show, You're So Cool, Rob Medina, twice last year. The first time around, I had him on my show with his production company, Outside Production, along with Kenny Pitts, Jason Alexander, Chad Matthews, and of course, Adam Hampton. And then I had another conversation with just Adam Hampton himself on my show the second time around. And this movie did come up in the conversation more towards the end because we had a pretty long conversation, a near 2-hour conversation the second time around. And when he had talked about this movie, he was one to say he was very proud of the film, and he felt like that he had delivered his best performance up to that point in this movie. And for him to say that really caught my attention. I was excited to check out the film because I am a big fan of Adam Hampton. But for him to say that he felt like this was one of his best performances, if not his best performance up to that point, it definitely caught my attention because he had done a movie that I had done a review here on the channel called 90 Feet From Home, which I thought he was amazing. And that's a really good film as well, too. And then he had also done a TV show that's on YouTube right now with his production company, Outsiders Production, called Rough Cut, which is an absolute gem of a show, in my opinion. Highly underrated because no one's ever really heard of it before. And I do recommend you guys do check out both, 90 Feet From Home and Rough Cut, which are both available on YouTube, where you guys can check out for free. And I do highly recommend you check them both out. But I love this performance in both of those respective projects there. And so for him to say that this was his best, I was in. And then after the conversation I had with Adam, he had recommended I speak with the writer and director of the film, and Kuya Harris, who I've reached out to and had on my show last year. And around that time, this film was expected to be released in October of 2022. So in my conversation with Kyle, he definitely delved into more about the project and talked about the plot synopsis and whatnot. And I was really intrigued with his take on story in general, where he had talked about that what he was trying to look for in terms of the character's motivation. The characters have an external goal, and then somewhere along the way they discover their internal goals, where their motivations have changed. Something that's done in an effective way for that to have a really good impact in the overall story. And when he had talked about the movie, he said he was really proud of it. And this is actually his debut feature film. He had done some short films beforehand, which I had the opportunity to check out as well in anticipation for this movie here. But when I saw the movie last year, truthfully, I was blown away with the movie. I thought that this movie was so good. I've reached out to both Adam and also Kuya Harris and letting them both know that I think this movie is amazing. I was blown away with this film for a number of different reasons, which I'll be getting into in this review here. But I will say, though, that this will not be a review that I'll get into spoilers here, because the things that I had enjoyed about the movie that I had discovered along the way, I should say, I was pleasantly surprised. Not that it's going to be like a surprise Sixth Sense twist ending. It's nothing of that sort, but just surprised in the way how the film had ended, that it really left me questioning about what actually had occurred, because it's one of those stories where I think that when you get to the end of the film, I'm not sure if it's going to be a divisive ending for a lot of people. I don't think that's really going to be the case. But after I had a conversation with Adam Hampton recently, which I'll get into in a little bit here, along with his co-star in Kyle Henry, I started to wonder that if this particular ending had got this opinion out of Adam, and I'm thinking to myself, well, it left me with pretty well, really impressed with what I got in viewing the movie. But I'm wondering if it's going to be a divisive opinion about how the film had ended for people to respond to that. So I'm really curious about how that's going to turn out here, because this movie is going to be available this week on January 20th, where it's going to be available, I believe, on Paramount Plus, Apple TV. You can rent it and buy it on anywhere on any sort of VOD platform out there. And I think that there's a lot of expectations that I can really anticipate for this movie, because with what I got out of this film, left me in a lot of ways, as cheesy and as cliche as it's going to sound, but I mean everything that I say here, left me a little bit speechless here, because there's so much that I took away from this movie, much more than I anticipated. And for that film to have that impression on me in that regard, I'm anticipating that it's going to have somewhat of hopefully a very similar, if not a better impression with other people who will come across the film when they watch it for the first time. So of course, I'll get into the plot synopsis, no spoilers, and I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. After a botched armored car robbery, a recently paroled thief tries to balance his life and mend a troubled family as a determined FBI agent hunts him and his crew down. And that right there is a film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie is with the overall story that we get in this film, because the first thing that I noticed right away with the movie is, apart from the fact it's very well directed, which I'll get into in a little bit here under Kyle Kawiki Harris, but the story that we're following here, this is what I'm going to point out first about this part of the positive, is that this is a story that we haven't seen before. We've seen this story a million times, but I'm always curious to see how what we've seen before on more than one occasion, how the director, in this case, both for Kyle Kawiki Harris, who wrote and directed the film, what he's doing to making it different, so that way when you watch the film, you don't think of it and having to compare it to another film that's sort of like The Town or Heat, for that matter. And when you look at the film, you can automatically think Out of Exile, where you don't have to think about it in comparing it to other films. And I think he did a really good job in creating more or less its own identity. You can clearly see the influences from these other respective films, like Hell or High Water, again, Heat, and The Town. Those influences are definitely in this film, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, it is its own thing, where you can tell that Kyle had created a story that a lot of it has his own more or less DNA in the film. And the reason I'm bringing this up here is because one of the things that Kyle had talked about on more than one occasion is that he tries to put a little bit of himself in every story that he writes, where there is a personal connection to the film. In this case, failed parenthood, if you will, is one of the major things that he wants to delve into here. We talked about before in my conversation, and another one as well too, that he grew up not really knowing his father, and didn't really meet him till like when he was around 6. But even then, he didn't really know that man was his father. So he was never really in the picture for the most part. So he had that aspect of growing up, of not really knowing his father, and then to have that infused into this story, where in this case, Gabe, played by Adam Hampton, who has a daughter and hadn't seen her in 16 years because he had served a 16-year term. But when he went to prison, she was a child and had never seen her since that point. So he has no relationship with her, to the point where she had developed a lot of angst toward him along the way too, given the fact of what he had done that led him into prison and left her pretty much on her own to raise herself and take care of herself. But we discovered along the way that she's in an abusive relationship with another man. So clearly she's not in a very good spot, and he sees that. So the motivation for Gabe in this film was that he definitely wanted to be able to do one last job, get a lot of money, so he goes back with his old crew, and then be able to take that money and go back to a childhood home, I believe, if I recall correctly, where he can just live at peace for the rest of his life, more or less retire, if you will. But along the way, when he tries to reconnect with his daughter and really does his best to try to reconnect with her, he discovers that there's a lot more that meets the eye, that he realizes that I can't leave her hanging like that. I can't just leave her money and then have her take care of herself. She needs to be protected. Like, I need to be around her and protect her. But the problem is that she doesn't want nothing to do with him at all. So when there is an opportunity that presents itself where he does take the chance to be able to step in and help her out, then his motivation changes along the way, where the story becomes more or less about the father and daughter. And there's also some similarities, and I'm not saying exactly like that by any means, but Kyle Kawiki Harris does have a daughter as well too. So you can tell that in writing that aspect of the story, and from what I understand, he has a great relationship with his daughter. So I'm not implying that, the relationship we see with Gabe and his daughter in the film, that's how it is with Kyle and his daughter in real life. That's not what I'm implying by any means, but I could tell that motivation for the character for Gabe had been inspired by his relationship that Kyle has with his daughter, to more or less be the real motivation for the narrative of this story, which I think is done brilliantly in my opinion. And it's done in a way that it's not a forced situation. It's not a situation that he felt as if though it needed to be done just for the sake of it. It's a very organic form of storytelling that I thought worked very well when you see how everything gets played out from the very beginning to the very end of the film. The other thing I also want to point out too is with the cast in this film. I believe everybody, and I mean literally everybody, does a really good job with the performance, including Adam Hampton. I've said it before a while back. I can't remember which video I said it for, but I've named a few actors that are considered one of my favorite of all times, and Louis Mantle comes to mind. I think Gary Oldman's one of my favorite actors of all time. Thomas Jane, Tom Hallam, and then Adam Hampton. I mean, these guys, in my opinion, have delivered some great quality stuff that somehow, in some way, I've always connected with their work that made me invested from start to finish, no matter what the projects are, even if I didn't like the films that much, but I was invested in them as the actor in those respective films or shows that they've been a part of here, because I believe that they are so good that when they work on a project, they step it up a notch or two to make the film that much better, if you will. So when I saw Adam's performance in this movie, I was blown away with what he was able to pull off here. And then one thing that I also want to point out too is that when it came to the relationship that he has with his crew, like his inner crew, we have Wilson Nava, I'm terrible with names, so I forget everyone's names in the film, unfortunately. But we have Wilson Nava, who plays more or less like he's more kind of as like his right hand man, like a trusty man that you can look at as someone that can always do the job and will never do anything to jeopardize the crew, if you will. Whereas Gabe's brother is someone that does not have a very stable mind, and he has PTSD. He's a veteran who served time overseas, and when he came back, he wasn't the same that left, if you will. So there's certainly a motivation in that respect, which gives him a reason for why to be so unstable, as opposed to just some guy who is wild and crazy for the sake of it. No, there's actually a real motivation for why he is the way he is and what he's trying to do to overcome that, but dealing with the troubles in a way that's not very healthy, if you will. So there's a really set of standards when it comes to how each of these characters are put into the story here and how they serve well for the purpose of the story and how everyone interacts with one another, and they all have great chemistry. So there's a certain quality of a strong bond that comes with this film with each of these respective characters when it comes to their unity and how they will work together despite the differences they may have with one another. And when they're able to look past those differences to work together in this one particular job, if you will, it does make a lot of sense. And the motivations for each of those respective characters are valid, even though you may not always agree with it. At least in my perspective, it seemed that way. But you understand the reasons for why they're doing it, but primarily because they do work well together, and it makes sense for them to do that. And plus, they really do trust each other when it comes to working together in this capacity. The villain in this movie is a legendary actor in Peter Green. I'm sure a lot of people may recognize him for playing the part of Zed in Pulp Fiction, along with the villain where he played in The Mask. He was also in Training Day, The Usual Suspects, just to name a few. He's been in a lot of legendary work and a really good actor, in my opinion, as well, too. And look, and I'm going to be frank when I say so, and I hope when I say this, it doesn't come off the wrong way, but seeing that he's playing a character more or less like a villain that we've seen him play before on more than a million times. But for some reason, in this particular role, I actually loved what Kyle was able to bring out of him in doing something slightly different than with what we're used to seeing when it comes to a character of this sort that Peter Green is normally get to play here. And a lot of times, Peter Green's villains are always very they have a very aggressive persona about them where you just know you can't mess with them. But in this particular movie, what I appreciate about his performance in this film was that although he definitely does have that tough guy persona, but there are some moments where you get to see humanity in the character where you can see that there is somebody in there that's very much still has some humanity left inside of him, where he's willing to do what's necessary to try to bring balance to a degree. But in a heartbeat, he will cut your head off without hesitation here, because he understands that this is business and he's looking out for himself at the end of the day. He's not really looking out for the best interest of other people. He may do that for certain moments, but you think about it, is he doing it really because he wants to help them out in that situation? Or is he really just doing it just to keep balance, to protect himself in the process, so that way his business doesn't get ruined? Because you come to find out along the way too what his real motivation is, which is quite interesting, and I think you guys also get a kick out of it as well too. And then when it comes to the FBI agent, Ryan Merriman. Now this was somebody, I'll be completely frank, if I hadn't seen one movie before this film, I don't know if I actually would have been sold on the idea just on him alone playing the FBI agent who's in charge of this case here. Because Ryan Merriman, when you look at him, I'll be frank, he does still have that kind of boyish look about him that is still very imprinted on me from his work that he has done way back in the day for Disney and Luck of the Irish, just to name a few. And a lot of people will recognize him from those respective films. And he is a good actor too, so I'm not taking that away from him by any means. But the reason why I remember having a slight hesitation when I heard his name as being one of the leads in the film, especially playing the FBI agent hunting down these criminals, I just didn't know if he had that persona that's required for a role of that sort. Then one day I came across a movie when I was doing some research on Adam Hampton. He did called Jurassic Games, where Adam Hampton was also in that film, along with Ryan Merriman. So they had worked together before in another film, in that film in particular, I should say. And when I saw that movie, honestly, I loved Ryan Merriman's performance in that film. And I remember at that time thinking, like, this guy's a very good actor. And the preconceived notion that I had of him about that he's good at one thing when it comes to acting completely went away when I saw that movie, because I thought he did a really good job when it came to the performance he delivered in that film, being the host of that about that game that's in that movie. And he actually had won me over as an actor because of his performance in that film. So having seen that movie and then seeing this after the fact, I was very much anticipating with what he was going to deliver, because I'm not going to say I was skeptical or I was hesitant at that point anymore, but I was just more curious and a little bit more optimistic about his delivery as an actor in that film. And he completely blew it out of the gates, in my opinion. As cheesy as it sounds for me to say that, but he really was that good. And I think Ryan did a really good job in establishing a man who is seasoned, who does look like some people tried to walk over him because of the boyish looks that he has, but he is the man that's able to put people in their place and showing them who's in charge. As cheesy as it sounds for me to say that, but when you do get moments like that where people do try to get him a little bit of push around, and he does not budge at all, where he definitely does stand his ground. And when he does so, you do believe, because when Ryan does deliver that performance of that FBI agent in that film, he does it in a manner that I think is done very effectively, in my opinion. One other actor that I want to highlight here that honestly really caught me by surprise, and that's Kyle Henry, who plays the brother of Gabe in the movie. He is somebody that I would kind of point out before, that he was basically more or less the troubled individual in the film, who's really the loose cannon of this whole group, that he's the guy that's going to set everything off and can ruin everything for everybody. And Kyle, in my opinion, is an actor that I thought, I never heard of him before, but I guarantee that when people watch the film, they'll recognize him as an actor after his performance in this movie, because I think what he does in this film will set the standard of like what you can expect moving forward from him as an actor and what he's really capable of pulling off here. Because I only think this is the very, very, very tip of the iceberg as far as what he can really do, because what he does in this film, in my opinion, is nothing short of amazing. Because I think that his commitment to the role, which I had a conversation with him and Adam Hampton on my show recently, which I'll get into in a little bit, where he talked about, what he wanted to do to prepare for the role and what he had done to commit to the role. And that even though it took more or less a toll on him, where he still has some of that imprinted left on him, despite the fact that the shooting of the film has ended a couple of years ago, that some of that's still left over in him. So you can tell the level of commitment that he has as an actor to do the role justice, and it shows in that screen. I think he's an amazing actor, and I hope people will take notice of him and will grant him more opportunities to be able to do other things, bigger and better things as well too. Not to say that this is not any better. This is one of his absolute best, I would say, for sure, from that I've seen up to this point, and I'm curious to see what he was able to do after the fact as well. But with this performance here, it's really with how his performance and his chemistry that he has with everybody in the movie that really had won me over, because this is a character that we've seen before that, if not handled well at all, it could go wrong in so many ways. And clearly, Kyle Harris had trusted Kyle Henry to do the role justice, to do this role justice, because they've actually worked together before on a short film called Prone to Violence, which is more or less the basis of this movie for Out of Exile. And in that film, he more or less kind of plays the same character, not as troubled as he is in this movie, but much more stable in that sense, but more or less the same character. When you watch the short film, if it ever gets released in some capacity, I hope you guys do check it out, because that you can see right there all the ideas that Kyle Harris had about what he wanted to do with that short film, that he was able to explore and expand on in this movie, which is nothing short of amazing, in my opinion. Now, I also want to highlight here too, under the writing and directing of Kyle Harris. In my opinion, and I'm going to say this up front right now, I think Kyle is going to be one of those writer-directors that when you hear the name Kyle Harris, he's going to be in the same level as the Christopher Nolans, the Martin Scorsese's, the Michael Manns, I'm even going to sort of say Steven Spielberg as well too, where when you hear the name Kyle Harris down the line, he's going to be one of those writer-directors that people are going to recognize and know quality right away. They're going to know they're going to get a good film when it comes to what he writes and what he directs. And what I saw from these short films that I've come across here, there's quite a few that I really did enjoy. And you can tell that with each of those respective short films, he was getting better and better and better in terms of the narrative, the writing of the script, the directing, and getting the right people to be able to share the vision that he had come up with, to be able to tell in the story that that will be done in an effective manner. And when you get this movie here, everything that he had worked on and had worked really hard on to be able to get the best film possible, he definitely got it with this movie. And I think that when it comes to Kyle's writing here, there's something that I truly did enjoy when it comes to his use of character and the dialogue that he's written for these characters, where, you know, we've seen films of this before. We have brothers that are at odds with one another, and we have brothers that come to blows with one another. And the side of the story where we have Gabe trying to reconnect with his daughter, we've seen that a million times. And it's interesting to see how someone who's going to do something that we've seen before, to do something that's going to be different or just unique in a way that keeps us invested. I think Kyle has done a really good job in setting the tone of what we could be expecting, and then having some things unfold along the way where we have a few surprises that come out here. And again, the surprises that come out aren't necessarily Sixth Sense type of surprise moments, but rather just more about genuine character moments, that one thing that a character does leads to a set of consequences that have an effect on them later on as the story progresses, that catches up to them in some way or shape or form. And I think that when he has that set up in this movie, he does it in a way that it's very effective, that when you have those moments occur, it has an impact on you. At least that's what it did for me, and I'm pretty sure it will have that for many other people who will watch this movie and understand what I mean by that. So there's a lot of great qualities about this movie that I can certainly point out that really I can speak very highly of here. And I remember at the time just being blown away when I saw the movie. I told my wife, I was like, this movie's going to change everything, because I really believe that Kyle Kawika Harris is going to be one of those guys that will set the new standard when it comes to the crime thriller genre. And when I talked to him on my show last year about that, you know, he's a really big fan of that genre. And he's also a big fan of like movies like 13 Hours, Tears of the Sun. So if he's ever getting the opportunity to work on films of that sort, when it comes to those war type films, military films, if you will, I think he's going to do some things that are just going to blow people out of the water, that I think it's going to be very, very intriguing, very engaging, very entertained, but also have a very well impactful story that will get people thinking after they walk away from those films, just like how this movie got me thinking when I walked away from it, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So there's so much I can get into here, but the more that I want to get into this movie, it's just going to go into that spoiler territory. So that'll be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. The only real negative that I have with the film, it does have to do with the length of this movie. When I saw the movie for the first time, I saw the runtime was around an hour and 40 some minutes, around, you know, just a little bit over, under, if I recall correctly, but just an hour and 40 minutes to say. And I thought, great. So we're going to get a really good, you know, story with a lot of substance. Because after my conversation with Kyle, I thought, okay, we're going to get a great story. And we did. I definitely got a great story. But I realized halfway through the film that there was more that needed to be told, because I thought of Heat, the movie Heat that came out in 95. That's a near 3-hour film. That is a perfect runtime for that movie. And this movie needed that runtime, because when you find out, you know, that this is a low budget film, Kyle had pointed out that it's under $500,000 they shot for this movie, and they shot this movie for under a month. I think 21 days, 28 days, something like that. But they had more shooting locations than they did shooting days for this film. And I felt like that definitely impacted this movie, because the lack of resources in areas that I think they would have been able to use effectively to be able to expand on certain things when it comes to the locations and the time they would have with that, and the money as well too. It definitely would have fleshed out the story a lot more, where we would have got much more character development that was necessary for these characters in the movie and for this overall film in general. And I feel like that's really what it hurt the film the most, in my opinion, because as much as I really did love the film, and I love the movie, and believe me, I think this movie is fantastic, but the runtime is really what I think affected the film the most. You can tell that the limitations had just kind of kept the film at bay, where there's so much more to be told. Because when you get to the end of the movie, although it is a great ending, at least in my opinion, there's so much more that I feel like could have been told before you got to that point of the film, that I'm not gonna say it would make more sense. It definitely made sense with what we got out of this movie here, but there's something more that I felt like was missing that could have been delved into further to be able to expand on certain areas of the characters when it comes to the father and the daughter, the two brothers, the crime boss, the other crew members as well, just developing more of their story, because there's so much more to be told that unfortunately the limitations had kind of capped that, where we just didn't have enough breathing room to be able to expand on that. And the other thing I also want to point out too, when it comes to another negative, and again, this is more or less about, I think, the limitations for what this film had here, is the action sequences. They're not bad by any means at all. It's not terrible at all. So when I'm implying this here, that's not what I'm trying to indicate, that the actions didn't work. They did work, but you can tell the limitations were a major factor in being able to expand on that to have a much more impactful action sequence in the movie. Because out of all the things that occur in the film, I actually thought the action sequences in this movie would have the most impact, but in fact, they had the least impact on me personally. Because when you look at a movie like Heat, it takes a long time to get to those action sequences, and they work effectively. And same thing with The Town too. It takes a while for those moments to build up to the shootout sequences, and they have an effective impact on you as an audience member. Unfortunately, with this movie, you definitely have those buildups, but it didn't have the same effect on me personally, where I felt like it could have had that. But I believe that the limitations when it came to those action sequences, again, because they only had under a month to shoot the film, more shooting location than they did shooting days. So that clearly had an effect on the production when it came to certain sequences. In this case, the action sequences, that you could felt the limitations, where I felt like more time was given to them, more money, more location, if you will. It definitely would have helped out fleshing out those sequences a lot more impactful, in my opinion. So those are really the only two major negatives that I can really think of right now that had the most, that I felt like was the most negative that worked on, that affected the film in a negative light. But overall, this is a great film. So I hope that by me saying this here doesn't give you the wrong impression that because of those negatives that the film doesn't work. It does work, but I just think the limitations were a setback for this movie. But when you watch the film, maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't, but I certainly felt that way. But I think that despite those limitations, I still got a great movie. So for me, the quality certainly does speak a lot more in terms of those setbacks that I felt the film definitely had in the movie. So that'll be the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. I really do love this film. I think if there's a great way to start up the year for 2023 with a number of films, we've got quite a few that have come out that made a major impact with a lot of people this year so far. But if there's one film that I was looking forward to that will hopefully start off the year, and thankfully it does, and Out of Exile, this is the way to start it off here, because there's something about this movie that I really did connect with the film, as I've already talked about before, but there's so much more that I wanted to delve into here, but I only have so much time to do so, that when I had talked to Kuya Harris about this movie, and he had shared that a lot of people had expressed interest in his script for this movie, Out of Exile, and then he ended up not selling the script because he wanted to direct that movie. And if he had sold the script, the chances of him directing were very, very slim, to the point where he was guaranteed he's not going to direct it at all. So he definitely wanted to be in charge of that production to be able to direct this movie that he had written, because even he knew that this was a good film. And then to hear that other people who have offered him the money to buy the script and he had turned them down, they said, well, let me see what the film looks like so far. So he put together a rough cut of the movie, sent it out to those respective people. And when they saw the movie, according to him, they said, this is really, really good. I can see why you walked away, and I'm glad you did, because that was the right decision. You've got a good movie. So if you have people behind, more or less in the industry, saying that this is a good movie, I could only imagine what the general going audience, especially who love this genre, will be saying about this film. I'm not saying that everyone's going to love this film universally, but I do believe that the majority of the people that come across the film will walk away saying that's a very good film. And I hope they don't say it like this, but I can imagine that would be the case, that people will say, this is an independent movie with a low budget. This is a great film. But in my opinion, the budget doesn't matter, nor does the fact if it's independent or a major studio, although I am a huge supporter of indie films, but this is a great movie altogether. I love this film. So for me, I give this movie a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, this movie will be released this Friday on January 20th. It's going to be available on VOD. I believe you can also check it out on Paramount Plus, Apple TV, and a few other platforms as well, too. Can't remember off the top of my head here. I highly recommend you guys go out of your way to check out this movie, rent it, buy it, but spend your money on this movie because this movie is worth every single minute of your viewing experience. I believe it's that good. And even if you're not a fan of the crime thriller genre, I do believe it's a film worth checking out because I think there's something you can take away from this movie that will leave you thinking, hopefully walking away being entertained, but just walking away with a great story that was presented here to you. So I do recommend you all check it out. And then when you do, I would hope to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the film, whether you liked it or hated it. I really want to know because I have a gut feeling that the word of mouth of this movie, for the most part, would be positive. So I'm curious to see if you guys have checked out the film, what you guys thought. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the NRW and also make sure you share, like a video, hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. And also follow us on social media on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina. And my guests this week are the two stars of the film, and Kyle Henry, I meant to say, I was going to say Kyle Harris, but no, Kyle Henry and his co-star Adam Hampton. I had a great conversation with both of these actors and having them go into depth and more details about their experiences in making the movie, their opinions on certain things that occurred in the filmmaking process and the film itself. And we just had a really good time. And I had laughed quite a lot in that conversation. So when you guys do get the opportunity to check out that show when it drops this Friday, same day of the film's release, I hope you guys get a kick out of it because there's so much that we were able to delve into that I hope will be very interesting for you all to listen to and learn about, and also encourage you to check out the film. So make sure you guys check the show when it drops this Friday. And I also have social media for the show as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And that'll be it for my review. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe out there and cheers.